Well, Adil Abdel Mahdi has lost control. It's interesting to see Qais Khazali at the forefront of this choreographed violent action against the U.S. Embassy. Perhaps many remember 1979 when the U.S. Embassy was stormed by protesters at the Iranian Islamic Revolution. We have not reached that situation just yet, but there are certainly echoes of that. Now, we are seeing leaders of Kataeb Hizballah, we're seeing leaders of Asa'ib al-Haq and other associated Iranian-backed Iraqi militias that are involved with this activity, with the attempted storming of the U.S. Embassy. We've seen Qais Khazali there, we've seen Falah Fayyad, we've seen Hadi al-Amri and others. They're raising the Hezbollah flag. They're chanting, "No to America, no to Israel. America is the greater devil." So this is clearly an indicative of a choreographed effort here. Now, of course, this is happening in response to the killing of nearly 25 Iraqi Kataeb Hizballah militiamen. By the way, not just in Iraq, but also in Syria as well. These Iraqi militiamen, at the behest of Iran, have been operating in Syria as well. Many Syrian opposition have accused these militias of horrendous human rights abuses and ethnic cleansing. Now, it's interesting also, Qais Khazali used to be in American military detention just 12 years ago. He led his Iraqi Shia militia to fight the American forces and the Iraqi security forces in Baghdad. Now, 12 years later, he's there at the forefront calling for the U.S. to leave and directing some of this violent activity that we're seeing now.
And how does Adil Abdel Mahdi deal with the hundreds of thousands of people who have been protesting over the past few months, at least 300 protesters having been killed, and many, many of those people protesting against their own government, saying that you're too influenced by Iran? Many people say that actually nobody can be Prime Minister of Iraq without Iran's consent. So there are these domestic issues taking place, and the danger is that this mini proxy conflict, from what happened in Kirkuk on Friday to what happened on Sunday with the American airstrikes, with the Americans sending messages to Iran and Iran trying to influence what's happening in Iraq, with Iraq getting caught in the middle. It's becoming a mess.
I'm very glad that you raised that point. There's a total vacuum of leadership in Iraq right now. Hundreds of innocent civilian protesters have been killed, not only by Iraqi security forces, but also many suspect by Kataeb Hizballah militiamen. They've been protesting since October, calling for more freedom, calling for Iran to no longer have such a stranglehold on their government in Baghdad. And so it's so interesting that even after hundreds of civilians were killed when they were protesting, now we're seeing these so-called protesters so easily access the so-called green zone and the U.S. Embassy without the Iraqi security forces firing a single shot. So that speaks volumes in itself. We heard many of these protesters over the past few months saying for Iran, get out, get out. We want Iraq to be free. But yet, very clearly from the footage that we're seeing now at the U.S. Embassy, the Iranian-backed militias that have been armed and ideologically trained by Iran are still very much in control in Baghdad.
Oubai, you mentioned Tehran 1979. There's also the Benghazi consulate, the U.S. consulate in Benghazi when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, the storming of that diplomatic mission there. How much do you think this might be playing on the minds of people who are in contact with the military soldiers, the American soldiers who are inside that compound right now? It's believed, according to Reuters at least, that those American soldiers have fired stun grenades at the protesters outside. We don't know whether it's the Americans or Iraqi security forces who have used tear gas, but someone is going to be talking to those soldiers inside.
Absolutely. Now, the U.S. Marines are probably still in the embassy at the rooftops. Remember, this is America's largest and most fortified embassy throughout the world. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent to build this embassy, to fortify it, because it was just a few years ago that Iraqi Shia militias were launching rockets from one part of Baghdad into the U.S. Embassy compound. So this contingency has been planned for. Most of the embassy personnel, to include the ambassador, have been evacuated, although we can expect that some embassy personnel, to include a handful of U.S. Embassy Marines, are going to be holed up in the embassy. But we're talking about thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of Shia militiamen that are armed throughout Baghdad, throughout Iraq. They have heavy weaponry, not just small arms. So if they wanted to storm, if they want to launch more rockets into the embassy, it could certainly be chaos beyond what we saw in Benghazi.
Okay, Oubai, thank you so much indeed. Oubai Shahbandar.